Hult Prize Nigeria Podcast.
Hi innovators, changemakers, and global leaders. My name is Samuel Olomu, and I'm your host for the Hult Prize Podcast. Here on Hult Prize Podcast, we spotlight innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership. It's a platform for bold ideas, for leading questions, and for stories of resilience and grit. So, watch this space. Welcome on the show. This is Hult Prize Nigeria's podcast. My name is Samuel Olomu, and I'm the Public Relations and Communications Lead for Hult Prize Nigeria. And at Hult Prize, we host the world's largest competition for students, particularly in Nigeria. This year, we are going to be hosting about 150 schools rather, across the nation for the Hult Prize Nationals at the Heart of Lagos. So yes, you are welcome on the show again. So please note that this is a pre-recorded podcast. I've done the first part of it offline. Then we are just going to add this to the rest of the conversation. So yes, we get right into it. Today we are joined by Weirong Li, who is a global communication strategist and a social impact leader. She's best known as the founder of the C.L.A.R.I.T.Y communication framework and CEO of Raw Culture, a Forbes 30 under 30 honoree, New York University commencement speaker, and TEDx presenter on global citizenship. She combines international experience across the United Nations, business, and youth empowerment. Weirong, you are welcome on the call once again.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I have two questions that I'm going to be asking you and one of the first question is, you have experiences across the United Nations. You were born in Hungary to Chinese parents, and then you have experiences across global businesses and youth ecosystems. So how have you navigated multiple cultures in a way that has shaped and lead your on the show? This is Hult Prize Nigeria's podcast. My name is Samuel Olomu, and I'm the Public Relations and Communications Lead for Hult Prize Nigeria. And at Hult Prize, we host the world's largest competition for students, particularly in Nigeria. This year, we are going to be hosting 150 schools across the nation for the Hult Prize Nationals at the Heart of Lagos. Today, we are joined by Weirong Li, who is a global communication strategist and a social impact leader. She's best known as the founder of the C.L.A.R.I.T.Y communication framework and CEO of Raw Culture, a Forbes 30 under 30 honoree, New York University commencement speaker, and TEDx presenter on global citizenship. She combines international experience across the United Nations, business, and youth empowerment. Weirong, you are welcome on the call once again.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I have two questions that I'm going to be asking you and one of the first question is, you have experiences across the United Nations. You were born in Hungary to Chinese parents, and then you have experiences across global businesses and youth ecosystems. So how have you navigated multiple cultures in a way that has shaped and lead your journey? You know, you travel around the world, you do a lot of
So growing up,
yeah,
it's such a good question. Growing up among multiple cultures across Hungary, China, and the American education system, it really has taught me that effective leadership isn't just about imposing one communication style. It's about emotional and cultural awareness and intelligence. For example, in Hungarian culture, being direct with your communication is valued and important. However, in Chinese culture, context of the situation and relationship building comes first. And then in American culture, especially business culture, it's about the efficiency and the results that you deliver. So my multicultural experience and foundation really has become my, so to say, competitive advantage. At the UN, I could connect and talk with people from 70 plus countries because I understood that the same message would not be delivered the same way. So when I developed, the Clarity framework, I built in this cultural probability as well as emotional and relationship building probability. The R for relating with empathy, it specifically addresses understanding different cultural contexts before you communicate. And research also shows that leaders who are aware and especially culturally intelligent are actually 3 times more effective at succeeding in driving these international projects.
Thank you so much for that. So yes, you mentioned communications, and from what you should understand, Hult Prize is about young individuals, students across universities who are building social enterprises, who are building solutions to societal's pressing issue. So talking about communication, most founders, like let's say most young founders, actually focus on the idea. They focus on the products, they focus on the kind of problem they want to solve, but most of them usually underestimate communication. Particularly, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and I told him that whenever you want to start a business, the first thing you should be thinking about after the problem is marketing communication. How do I want to get this product out to people that are buying? I feel that is the most important. You must have a good product and not have like that market to get those products. So how do you think communication is often the difference between a good idea and scalable impact ventures? So what do you think communication changes in any idea?
Well, Samuel, you are right on because there's actually data that supports this. Communication is so important. The data shows that 57% of the projects fail because of poor communication. It's not bad ideas. It's because people don't know how to properly share that idea with other people. So I've seen brilliant, founders fail because they weren't able to articulate what their value is and to articulate it to their investors, their customers, or even their team members. So, for example, at Raw Culture, we connect entrepreneurs and work with entrepreneurs all across the world, right? And I noticed a pattern, which is the ventures that scaled weren't necessarily the most innovative because we do kind of reinvent the wheel, but they were the ones that could really communicate their impact story where everybody can understand. So they understand that investors don't just fund, ideas, but they actually fund the people, the story behind it.
Yeah.
And if they don't know and understand what your story is, it's very hard for someone to believe in what you're doing. So the difference is just being very intentional, strategic about your communication, about storytelling, and just understanding that from customers to investors, there's a pattern that storytelling and communication is non-negotiable to get your ideas across to them.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So you founded like the Clarity communication framework. Can you break it down for us and share how young leaders can practically apply this, particularly while pitching at the Hult Prize competition or during fundraising or when they are building a team?
Absolutely. I created the Clarity framework, first of all, because I realized that Gen Z, especially our young generation, they don't know how to communicate and build relationships like our previous generations because we grew up online. And because of this, 60% of our generation feels paradoxically isolated and lonely, even though we are hyper connected on our phones all day. So the framework addresses this communication gap that, prevents, real intention about communicating well, and also connection and influence, which is really important for when you are building your venture. To break it down, I broke it down into 3 different categories, and for each category, we have a characteristic of the framework. For entrepreneurs, founders who are pitching, I would say starting with the letter C from C.L.A.R.I.T.Y framework, which is creating self-awareness. So creating self-awareness about what you're passionate about, right? Understand what drives you, what uniquely something that you can solve and have a unique insight. A, articulating your vision clearly without adding extra words, which ties into communicating effectively. And L, listening actively. Listen actively to investor questions, to your team members, instead of just waiting to speak. And that's a lot of the times the most important thing that I see that people don't understand is they feel like they need to pitch all the time. But in a lot of investor meetings, you're first actually getting to know the other person and the investor. Because if you just start out, you're just starting with an idea. And so they want to get to know you as people, and they want to be able to share their story too. So understanding the dynamic that it's not just you going in and pitching, but really building a relationship that compounds so much more. Okay, next one would be fundraising. So for fundraising, I would say R, relating with empathy. So understanding what your investors actually care about, right? Again, a lot of investors early on, they care about the story and the person. So if you're able to share and connect with them in a way where they have a similar kind of experience, a background, or somehow relate to them, that puts you far ahead than other people. And then I, interacting intentionally. So being intentional about building these relationships before you actually need funding. People don't really like it when you're asking them something when you actually need it, right? People like it when you've built that relationship and track record before you ask someone something. So keep that in mind. And then T, tackle misinformation. So tackle misinformation by having data-backed responses to questions or objections that investors, members have, right? And then now we're moving on to the third category, team building, which is a really important part of growing your venture. It starts with the character Y, so yielding vulnerability. I would say being vulnerable by sharing your difficulties, but as well as just celebrating your wins. Research shows that this really helps because it builds 76% more trust, those vulnerable leaders. So, the key is not to use all of these different letters at the same time. It's more like a little kind of menu where you can just pick whatever fits the situation best.
Thank you so much for that particular insight. And yes, I want to hear about your journey. Like, how did all of this start? Personally, for me, I have like a background in communication. I didn't study journalism, but I've written for virtually the biggest newspapers in Nigeria. I've appeared on a number of international media companies, websites too, and particularly currently I work with IT Web Africa as a business technology journalist. So I actually have like a little background in communication, if that should be called it too. Yes, and while I was in Lagos State, I just graduated at Lagos State University. I founded a media organization on campus. We have like this mission of training 1,000 next generation communication professionals. So that's our mission. So I want to hear about your drive. I want to hear about your mission. How did this journey start for you?
How did my journey start? It started with my struggle. It started because I was born in Europe, but I look like this. I'm, my parents are Asian. And growing up, I had a lot of difficulties understanding my identity and who I am. When I was at home, I was Chinese. When I was outside in Hungary, I was considered European, maybe American, who knows. And so a lot of times people would question where I'm from, and they would tell me, Weirong, like, you are not European, like, you're Chinese, or
Okay.
Weirong, they would tell me all of these things. And there was to a point where I just felt kind of a lack of confidence about myself because people were telling me all these different things about who I am, who I should be, going back to my home country. Unfortunately, a lot of racism. And so I thought, why is this still happening? Why do people judge people's stories without even understanding who they are? And I so wanted to be able to kind of share this struggle because I know my friends who grew up different internationally also had the same struggle. And so I decided, why would I just be sad in my home and overthink about what other people think about me? Why not create a, community where we can all support each other and share our struggles of growing up with this multicultural background? And so I started Rock Culture, first as a blog. So it was never intended to be a company. I started as a blog. We wrote our stories of what it's like growing up in a multicultural household, speaking different languages, but also the struggle of it, which is people always questioning you, not understanding who you are, and feeling like we never are enough or belong. And that became very fast a place where a lot of people like myself would kind of share their thoughts, meet, write, and eventually that turned into a media company because I saw the need for also from the company side to hire internationals who like ourselves. And so that turned into us doing interviews, podcasts with leaders in business. And then eventually we were starting into a more agency style company where we did campaigns, podcasts, and so on. So it really started because I had a struggle myself and I wanted to solve it. And I knew so deeply that other people shared that struggle.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so happy learning about your journey and what actually led you to starting your company. So, we have different kind of business. We have the business of your passion. Those are some of the things you are passionate about, and you're like, I could solve problem for people. I could deliver these particular services to people that actually need it. I'm passionate about it. We have the business of your problem. I feel the kind of business you've told me about now, the kind of way what actually influenced your journey is because you faced a problem at the early stage and you wanted to change that kind of narrative for other people. Yeah, and I think that that is the highest form of business because it makes you passionate about the problem you are solving. It shows that you are empathetic about this particular subject matter because you've always been in this shoe. So yes, thank you so much for that. And so you've supported leaders across countries and sectors, particularly to your organization. So how can young entrepreneurs, particularly under the umbrella of the Hult Prize Nigeria, stay authentic to their voice while adapting to different cultural or professional environments? You mentioned that there has been a lot of stereotype about where you're from and all of that, and you see that as a problem, and you created a solution. Why not tell our stories, right? Stories we do not tell are as if they do not even exist. Okay, so why do you think, or how do you think young entrepreneurs, particularly at Hult Prize Nigeria, should stay authentic to their voice while also adapting, trying to adapt to other cultural, when these people go out, when they move from the ideation stage, which we are currently doing at Hult Prize Nigeria, to, let's say, to pitch to investors even outside of Nigeria. So they need to communicate, they will need to understand the kind of people they are pitching to, they will need to adapt to certain culture. So do you think they should actually stay true to their voice? And if yes, why?
Absolutely, stay true to yourself. The truth always comes out, first of all. And when you mentioned about authenticity, so people think that staying true to yourself means that you have to always be the same person. Yeah? But that's not true. Like, I have different parts of myself, and that's totally fine. That's still a part of me, and that's still who I am. That doesn't make me any less different. And so I think we need to change that mindset of what it means to be authentic, right? And authentic, again, doesn't mean you have to be the same person every single meeting or room, but it's being very conscious about what are your values, what are your core values, what are things that you are non-negotiables for you. So think about what your mission is, your purpose, and how your values come from that, or what are your values, and then adapt to everything else. So you can always stay true to yourself, but still be a bit different if you understand what grounds you from the core value and mission alignment. So for example, like when I was at COP28 with the climate conference, like the way that I was talking about or sharing climate topics, it would be different than when I speak to people at a tech conference. But like the underlying mission is still the same, right? I wanted to bring together people from different backgrounds and cultures and make it possible to collaborate on different projects. But it's different topics. I was still myself. So I would say reflecting about who you want to be and what does that mean and how you show up. And then always think about have those core values in your mind, regardless where you are, so that you can stay consistent and be honest about who you are. And it's interesting because there's also research on this from Harvard Business School that shows being like authentic, being an authentic leader, they're the ones who adapt their communication style while maintaining a value. So this is actually research. So there's actually a 40% more effective statistic if you are being authentic at building kind of diverse teams and groups. So again, then going back, the key is really being intentional about how you adapt to different circumstances. It's not about just, code switching and not having a direction. It's very different.
Thank you so much, Weirong. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to ask you like two more questions before we call it a day. You know, I mentioned it earlier that Hult Prize is about young people, young individuals building solutions that matters to solve societal pressing problems, rather, particularly from Nigeria. What advice or what mindset shift, or let me say, what daily habits will you recommend to these young founders that you think is going to help them communicate their vision clearly and scale their impact globally? So like what mindset shifts or what daily habits do you think they can actually come up with in a way that is going to help them communicate more effectively?
Yeah. Besides the kind of framework of what I mentioned before, I would say that stop thinking that communication is a cherry on top. And you probably know this, Samuel. Communication is the foundation before everything else. You have to communicate to yourself first, communicate, understand how you feel about this, why you're doing this, reflect, and then you can communicate with others, right? And share that vision, share that passion. So stop thinking communication is something you would do only after you have your solution. Integrate that as a part of your pitching, of your communication with your team members, with your investors. Build as a part of that solution. So think about in your next customer interview, something you can do as a habit is in every conversation, ask like one follow-up question, before you're sharing your perspective. So really listen, and you'll figure out that you like found out things that you never knew about before, which they probably were already sharing, but because you were actually interested in the other person, you understood that. Something else I would say is also like spend 5 minutes every day and think about, a person or a partner who you need to understand a bit better about. Think about it. Think about what areas or what kind of actions or habits that you've noticed from them can help you understand how to communicate better with them. Write those down, kind of journal about it. A lot of communication is about observation and actually being silent. And you know this, which is communication is not about just talking.
Yeah.
So much more is about being silent. And so let's just make silence also, first of all, sexy, but also that it's a part of communication. When you don't talk, that is communicating something. And last but not least is practice telling your story. Practice, telling your story, practice pitching, practice it with other people who are not in your field. And why I say this is because when you talk about your story to people who are outside of your industry, but they can still understand it, then you won, right? Then you can really communicate to kind of diverse audiences. And especially if you can communicate it to a 5-year-old, for example. A kind of interesting example, what I do is in my email, in my communication, I copy and paste the text that I send and I put it into, now I put it into ChatGPT, where I say, make this into a, fifth grade or third grade language. Now it's more like third grade language, and people, it's really funny. And just why I do it is because there's research that shows that people who use fancy words are actually perceived as, are not as smart as those who use easy words, because people don't understand what we're talking about. The whole idea is for them to understand you. It's not for people to be like, huh? What does that mean? Oh, she's so cool. Or, oh, like, he's amazing. Like, he knows these fancy words. But your goal is that they understand what you're trying to share. And so, take that ego away, and try to communicate in a way that the other person at the end of the day understands.
Thank you so much. I agree with you on everything you said. So, first, one of the things you mentioned is that you need to learn how to communicate to yourself. That communication is not only to a third party or to a second party. And you also mentioned that silence can be communication. Silence is also communication. When you are silent, you are communicating something. And in most cases, I studied law, and I knew that silence can also amount to acceptance. So whenever somebody is asking you to do something and you are silent, it is either you are accepting to do it or you are not accepting to do it. So, and then you mentioned we need to tell our story. We need to tell our story, and you should remember that I mentioned that stories we do not tell, they are as if they do not exist at all. And what you mentioned about copying your email and pasting on ChatGPT to help you decode, and I feel I do that personally. I will just paste it and tell ChatGPT to let me explain this as if you are explaining to a 5-year-old. So the kind of way it's going to break it down is going to be very different from those Other stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And just one last question. You'll be serving as a judge at the Hult Prize National Competition. I mean, the virtual round happening this April, and you'll be interacting with a lot of young founders, entrepreneurs from across 150 universities in Nigeria. So, what advice will you give these startups, and what particularly do you look forward to? What kind of solutions do you look forward to seeing?
I want to, as an advice, I would give, because a lot of the people who I guess I'm addressing is people who are starting off, right? Like, don't be afraid that you don't know everything. You won't know everything, okay? Starting off. And people who have built also successful ventures and are raising their Series C round, they don't know what they're doing either. And so I would say so much a part of that entrepreneurship is just navigating the unknown, right? But developing a mindset to that, which is, I want to stay curious and I want to learn during this process instead of thinking I need to figure it out. So it's at the end of the day, there's going to be, I can guarantee you, there's never going to be a time where you're going to figure everything all out, especially in a startup. And so I would shift that mindset of feeling like I need to, cover every single kind of problem or try to solve it in a way where at the end of the day, it will be perfect. If you have that mindset, then you're kind of like digging yourself an own hole. So be curious, be optimistic, and most importantly, think of this just as a learning process and a journey. Just try to learn as much as possible, and these skills that you develop early on can be used in so many other, personal as well as career contexts. And in terms of the second question, can you repeat the second question?
What do you look forward to?
Oh, what I look forward to? I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy that there is, whole, foundation, what you guys are doing, because young people, like, we have so many problems in our world. There's so many problems and ideas that we need to solve, for. And so the fact that we are encouraging and Hult Prize is encouraging young people to, instead of sitting there and thinking about stuff, actually do stuff, that is I'm very hopeful about the future for this. But personally, if you want to ask, like, what kind of problems or solutions I'm looking forward to, is ways where we can blend technology and human connection. We talk so much about, AI, about the latest innovations. At the end of the day, if you ask me, what still remains is the ability to be human and to build relationships and connect. That is something that will never, ever be out of date. Innovations will change, but being able to connect with people, that's something that will always stay. So I'm super excited of ways where either it's building communities online, an app or something, some ways where we can really bridge that gap. That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for joining live on the Hult Prize Nigeria podcast today. Once again, my name is Samuel Odomo, and I'm so happy to have this discussion with you. Thank you so much for joining. Bye.
Pleasure. Thank you, Samuel.